You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
We'll call this meeting of the Branford Planning and Zoning Commission to order. It is Thursday, March 5th, 2026. I have about 7:03 p.m. We'll start by introducing members of the commission and staff. Commission member Joe Chadwick. Joe, are you here?
Joe Chadwick is present.
Commission member Fred Russo. Fred, are you here?
Fred Russo is present.
Thank you, Fred. Commission member Joe Viuso. Joe, are you here?
Joe Viuso, present.
Thank you, Joe. Commission member Marcy Pelusi. Marcy, are you here?
Marcy's present.
Commission member Sharon Hutner. Sharon, you here?
Sharon Hutner is here.
Thank you, Sharon. And Commission member Dave Dyer. Dave, you're here?
Dave Dyer's here.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Our staff this evening is our town planner, McKeel Wackers. McKeel, you're here?
Yep, present.
And our assistant planner, Dan Robinson. Dan, you're here?
I'm here.
And also our clerk recording secretary is Michelle Martin. And I think I see our zoning enforcement officer, Heather Gwinnell, doing extra time and coming to our zoning meetings.
Just here for bond release, and I love landscape, so.
Oh, okay. I knew there was an ulterior motive here. Okay. Thank you, Heather. And I'm Chuck Anders, chair. So we'll go through our normal agenda. The way we do it is for a public hearing, the applicant goes first, does make a presentation. We typically turn it over after the applicant's presentation to commission members and staff to ask questions and have comments. Then we open it up to the public for public comment. Ask that you state your name and address for the record, so we have that on file. And then I'll ask McKeel or Dan to go over the process for public participation. After the public portion, the applicant is allowed to respond. It looks like a fairly light agenda tonight. I understand that item number 2, which was a public hearing for 23 West End Avenue, Vincent Grillo, that has been withdrawn. So I think that the major item is our landscape revision regulation. That is the item for this evening. So with that, Fred, is there any legal notice to read?
Yes, we have. Let's see. If the Vincent Grillo applicant has been withdrawn, that was the only one that was on the legal notice. So I guess there's no reason to read it then, correct?
That's what I would say. McKeel and Dan, that's correct. That application has been withdrawn.
Okay,
That's correct.
If it has, then I have no other legal notices to read.
Okay, thanks, Fred.
Okay.
Okay, I will ask McKeel to review the process for participating via this Zoom meeting.
Thank you, McKeel Wackers, town planner. So I put the instructions in the chat feature. So if you want to participate in the public hearing and you wish to speak and you're using a computer with a microphone, click raise hand in the participant window. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. Dial in information is listed on the agenda. If you don't wish to speak, you may submit comments using the chat feature. We will monitor as best we can, but speaking is preferred. A reminder, if you wish to speak or add a message in the chat, you must provide your name as required by Public Act 22-3, and all details are available on the agenda. All right, Chair.
Okay, Chuck Anders, chair. Thank you, McKeel. Okay, so item number 1 is on our agenda is the continued public hearing by the commission-sponsored zoning text amendments regarding landscaping regulations. We opened the public hearing at our February 5th meeting and had some good discussions and comments, and continued it to this evening. And I think there were some, again, this has been going on for quite a while. It started probably over a year ago, and then we've had lots of reiterations, subcommittee working on this, and hopefully we're getting closer. So, Mikhail, you want to summarize what's new or what's going on with this one since the last
Yeah,
time?
so let me share my screen. So since the last meeting, I took the comments that were presented in writing and from the public hearing. I've tried best to incorporate them in the draft that was uploaded to OpenGov. The changes are in red, and I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. The first was applicability. There was discussion about adding back in section 3 regarding residential, and the swap out the central business district with the Main Street overlay district. I also, based on the limits of disturbance conversation, I added in construction logistics as an element that can have a impact on what is appropriate limits of disturbance. And that is in red at the bottom, and I just updated because logistics is not necessarily improvement. I just said the needed elements and improvements. And swapped out guidelines. I swapped it with standards. There was comment about making sure we are clear on our screening requirement, what that means. I didn't want to change. I thought there was comments that the intent in that section 3H, the first paragraph, sort of captured a lot of what we're trying to get at, but it wasn't strong enough. So I added in a screening, I guess, buffer. So if you're within 25 feet of a residential structure, then we really need to, that's where screening would be required. So I'm trying to put a proximity with what you're screening against, rather than saying the property line and all of a sudden the entire property line needs to be screened. Trying to really focus on what it is we're trying to screen it for. And then we had a lot of conversation about how do we give some flexibility. This is a lot of thought has been put in these regulations, but they can't think of everything. So I added in under alternative compliance that a landscaping plan can be submitted and approved as a special exception based on the standards set forth in section 9.8F of the zoning regulations. I would call it sort of the PDD version of a landscaping plan, but that would be a special exception process. And that was it. Let me share one other thing before we get started. There was a conversation, if we add section 3 in, what does that mean in terms of the number of uses that are now going to be included? And I have a slide here. Hopefully you guys can see it. So I basically took the tables from the use tables from section 3. We have 2 site plan uses, cemeteries and parks and playgrounds that would be required to use the landscaping requirements if there was an application under those uses. Special exceptions, there are 21 uses listed there from age restricted housing, open space residential, 2 families, multifamily, adaptive reuse, commercial kennels, golf courses, grading, hospitality, docks, municipal facilities, summer camps. And then I also add the accessory uses. We have 3 that require site plan approval and 5 that require special exception approval, and whether or not those would be included too. Right now, as it's written, you could feasibly say all these would require landscaping regulations to be adhered to. So that is, I think, food for thought, and want to make sure this is what our intention is. And hopefully it wasn't too quick. I'll take the commission's lead on what information I need to represent what I did last week, or if we're ready to sort of just have a discussion. All right, Chair.
Chuck Andrews here. Thank you, McKeel. Okay, so why don't we typically have some internal comment before we open it up to the public. I don't know if people have had a chance to review this, and make some comments, but why don't we just make the rounds a little bit and before we open up to the public, and I'll just go around. Joe Chadwick, do you have any thoughts or comments?
Yes, of course I do, and I can feel the eyes rolling right now. But the table on the limits of disturbance, I find that still somewhat arbitrary and somewhat, I don't know, I guess disturbing from the standpoint of how do you enforce it and what does it mean and how does it apply to a practical situation. One of the reasons I was late signing out tonight was I was putting a table together. And if I could just quickly share my screen, I'm going to have just a little conversation about this, because the distribution of what would amount to a limit of disturbance per square foot per building square foot ends up being kind of weird. First, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but below 4,999 square feet, you have a 25-foot limit. Over 5,000 square feet, you have a 45-foot limit. That's twice as much. What is it about the nature of the building or the process of construction of the difference of 2 square feet makes an extra 20 feet? You lay this out on a site, and on some sites, this may well end up 45 feet on each side of the building, extending into the neighbor's property. So it's not a specific enough. It grants I guess just just using a raw number like that will penalize people in some ways and make a difficult administrative process. If you look at if you look at it from a standpoint of you're going to put a square building on site, you end up with one sort of LOD donut around the building. You put a fairly rectangular building on the site, you get a somewhat larger LOD donut around that building. You say, well, I'm going to be a really great guy, and I don't want to disturb the site. I'm going to add a 2-story building or a 3-story building. Because this is indexed to the building footprint, the same guy who has a 3-story building is entitled to a far less limit of disturbance. I'm not saying it's a privilege to disturb the ground. I'm just saying that from the standpoint of how does one organize a construction site? And how does one accomplish building? And how would a construction manager hand this regulation to his APM and say, okay, draw me up a logistics plan on this, and be able to place equipment and machinery and a plan for digging and stuff like that based on the language in here and the sort of strictures that are placed. The other thought that occurred to me is in the utilities, 20 feet from infrastructure. Is this based on the center line of the infrastructure, 20 feet to each side, or is the 20 feet center over the infrastructure? If it centers over the infrastructure and you have a 3-foot deep trench in typical sandy soil, 45-degree angle repose, it's not great, but it's possible. If you have a 6-foot deep trench, you are practically at the limits of that 25 feet. And you've got no place to, trespass with vehicles because you're outside of your limit of disturbance. Also, will the nature of this attach to any utility easements? Because if there is a utility easement, at some point they're going to have to dig something up. And will this be part of that? Will this have to be written into the utility easement? That was just sort of a side question that came up. I've got some random notes here. 10 feet from the edge of the parking lot, I could not come up with a sort of model number for that. But it seems like parking lots are based on number of cars, which are based on use, which are based on size of the building, and how that lays across the site. I don't know how to calculate that and come up with a sort of tangible number, which is why I would probably want to just rely entirely on a logistics plan. I mean, we are relying on someone coming up with landscaping plans. So whoever's building this, if it's a building of this size, of this character, they are not going to be pickup truck and wheelbarrow kind of contractors. They're going to have some level of expertise in delineating things. They're going to have some responsibility to their mod rate and stuff like that. So they're going to have a logistics plan just to keep everybody in order. And having that as an actual deliverable formal document that you're going to, abide by this and you're going to build by this, I think is more realistic than just having a wholesale draw a donut around the building and have at it, especially when there's such a dramatic jump between 4,999 and 5,000 square feet. I should say 5,001 square feet, because the way it's written, if I have a 5,000 square foot building, I'm not going to be under the onus of an LOD. But if you let me share my screen later, I'll show you the table that sort of shows how this sort of jumps around, and what makes me think that this is not something that could be practically administered as a simple set of limits.
Yeah, Joe, you should have permissions to share. So
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
let me find you. All right, go now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So what this amounts to is some sample building square footages, shapes, 1-story square, 2-story square, 3-story square, 1-story rectangle. For lack of any better dimension, I picked 30 as the consistent width, and the length is just dependent on the square footage. And so you've got a 1-story, 2-story, 3-story rectangle. What you have in terms of the limits of disturbance ends up being sort of a little curve that drops down and then all of a sudden doubles at 5,001, and obviously gets smaller as you go. But if you look at the LOD allowed square footages, they get to be quite substantial. And in some cases, do they really need all of that square footage? It's the jump and the difference between the 499 and the 501 is incredibly dramatic. If we want to put a recommended number in, that LOD as a percentage of the site should be, something. We could probably pick somewhere like in the neighborhood of 3 times the building area. But I'm not sure we want to even go that far. But again, it's just having to put in a hard number like this and be able to enforce it. Just strikes me as just a burden to put on whoever's administering this. Plus the determination of the 25 feet, where does that fit on top of the trench? 10 feet from infrastructure. Again, is it 10 feet on each side of the infrastructure, 10 feet centered over the infrastructure? At some point, somebody's going to have to build it, and you're going to end up either having a lot of violations and a lot of headaches like that, or a lot of arguments. So have somebody come in good faith and show you what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. They can do the math pretty quickly, and you can bless it or not bless it. But that's my gripe for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Let me just do a couple follow-ups questions to you. And certainly the whole regulation by way of limits of disturbance is novel. I think that is, that's not in a typical landscape regulation. That's one of the newer things that I think this thing does. So I kind of understand it. There's not at least that I haven't seen it, but I haven't looked that hard. But so I understand that. But I understood your criticism to be there's a little bit of the it's hard to administer type of element, and then there's a possible unfairness element when you make the comparison that one gets more than the other, and is that better? Are you suggesting that we drop this whole section, or do you? I guess because I kind of want to get a regulation.
I know,
and what I'm kind of wondering what you would suggest.
If everybody is heart-bound into having a number, based on that graph, I mean, we can go either the mean or the average. It's a little less than 3. We can say 3 times the building area. But again, that only covers the building. I would say the limit of disturbance should not exceed 3 times the building area is recommended to be not exceeding 3 times the building area and shall be demonstrated on an actionable logistics plan.
Okay. So there is a proposed alternative text that you could play with that you think may be more doable or something. Okay. I'm just trying to get a handle on this.
Yeah, no, I think the LOD is a really important concept based on the kind of things that go on underground. There's that whole sort of ecosystem that with roots talking to each other and mycology and everything else. I really believe that's important, but I don't want to shortchange it, and I don't want to set up a situation where people are looking for end runs around a numerical, an arbitrary numerical limit. You could end up having a significant tree within that 45 feet or 25 feet. You could have, any number of reasons that you want to have something demonstrated, thought out, and carefully crafted on how we're going to build it and how we're going to interact on the site. And it's well within the technology of any contemporary contractor to put that document together. And typically they have to do it anyway. I mean, it's far less than what you do when you work in a hospital. And it's far easier than doing any work on the university. So this is not, a burden to anybody.
Thanks, Joe. Let's move around. Fred, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, okay. I can't get as technical as Joe because I just don't understand all this. But a couple of things would be this. One, first I'd like to thank Marcy and Peter for all the work they've done, because it in many ways it's a thankless job to come up with that and then have constructive criticism against it. My concern is this, and I've asked other people about the regulations, and we've done this for probably better than a year now. There was a public hearing, and a couple of things that stick in my mind. One is during the public hearing, we never had what I would consider, large scale, even on small scale, opposition or for or against the regulations either stay the same or to be changed. That was one. Two, one of the issues I thought that was brought up was that there wasn't input from the general public. I know that they can speak at a public hearing, but I remember there was a conversation at one of our meetings. We said, well, what about realtors, landscape architects? What about developers? Because they're the ones who are going to be most affected by any regulation change. And not that they're going to change our mind, but it would have been nice to hear their point of view. And we've gone through a second round of kind of revisions and proposals, and we still have not heard from those people. And I think we missed the boat by not having those people here. I think there's a technical side to this, and there's a practical side to any regulation. And I know that if I was a developer, I'd want it for me, want it a certain way. I think the regulations obviously have to stand above and beyond just what some particular contract would want. But I think their input is important, and I don't think we really ever got it, quite honestly. And I think, as I said, I think we kind of missed the boat on that. So, what I gleaned from all of this over the year, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it's been, is that one, there was never any outcry or opposition to keeping the regulations the same. Two, when the new regulations were proposed and discussed, there was no strong force saying we need to change them. And so that's kind of where I'm stuck between. I think that the revisions are always important to any regulation we have because you have to keep up with the times. But I just think for the amount of time and effort that's been put into this, I still don't understand what we're doing. It sounds crazy. I probably shouldn't even admit that, but I don't see a compelling difference between what we had and what we're going to have. And if what we're going to have is better, I'm all in favor of it. I'm not here as an opposition voice in this. I'm just trying to understand why there weren't more voices in here, why we didn't hear opposition pro or con, or other voices pro or con for the new regulations. And here we are again, more than a year later, discussing the same stuff under kind of the same circumstances. So, I know at one of our meetings, I think Marcy gave me a pretty good bit of information. I asked Mikhail, same thing. So I'm not against regulations, but I'm still like sort of in a gray area. If Marcy said to me, I think these are good regulations, I trust her. I would absolutely go in with her or Joe or Mikhail, whoever. I really don't know, and I admit that more than once that I don't understand the regulation. I only understand the people who could have been involved in this were not, and we can make a claim, say, well, we had a public hearing, they could have done it anytime. Yeah, I know we could have done that too, but I think it would have been nice to have reached out to the people within our community, the real estate agents and the developers and the what you call it, Perry Maresca with the economic thing. And I know he's been involved in this. Someone said he's not, but I just think it would have been nice to have had more input from more sources instead of putting the burden on two people to come up with whatever the new changes are. So listen, I'm always in favor of making the changes. If what Joe said is correct, I'm in favor. What Marcy said is correct, I'm in favor. What Peter Hedges said, I'm in favor of it. So as I said, I'm not against any of this stuff. I just want to understand it better. And I really, honestly, at this stage of the game, I don't understand why there was a compelling reason to make the changes. And that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just go on. Joe Vayuzo, thoughts, comments?
I have a couple things, I guess, and I'm listening to Joe how he's talking, and when Fred, and a little bit with Fred too. I got some gray areas too because I'm trying to understand it myself a little bit. But just two things that come to mind. One thing that comes to mind that Joe said that I'm just asking a question on when he said, well, instead of going by actual so many feet and go by 3 times the building size of disturbance, and that's all well and good. But my first thing, what came to mind real quick is it depends on what project it is based on their parking needs. Because you can have a warehouse that has larger building and very low parking needs, okay, there's not going to be a problem there. But if you have another situation, retail, where you require a lot more parking, so you're going to have a smaller building, or requires a lot more parking, which means it's going to have a lot more square footage of disturbance, which might be more than 3 times the size. So, I mean, that's a gray area, and that could be changed or accommodated somehow. But that what comes to mind is about going into, instead of actual numbers of 25 feet or 45 feet or whatever, 3 times. That could be changed into something if need be. And like I said, I still have some gray areas too. But the other one that comes to mind farther down in 6.3H, landscape screening, it says screening shall be required along any property boundary, residential structure and all that. But maybe the people required is a bit of a strong word. Maybe in some ways where maybe the 2 owners that own the property may not want screening or may not want certain things. But it says here required. Maybe that should be a little less stringent and say, add something in where it's not definitely has to be required, or just something a little bit less restrictive. And that just a thought as far as how's that written. And as far as the rest, I'm just trying to understand it myself. I'm going through it. I've been reading it for a while, going on and on, and I'm just more curious to listen to how everyone is, I guess, representing their thoughts. And so I'm just going to listen more and then go from there. Thank you.
Joe. Marcy?
Hi, yeah, no, I was actually kind of going through the Guilford and the Milford landscaping, and I'm trying to get back there. I read them kind of quickly at the last minute, but it's very interesting to me how general Guilford is. And there's one section in there, if I can find it. Try to do multiple screens so I can read and see. So I look up close. Where we used to have the in lieu of excellence in landscape. I was kind of reminded of that in a section where they have variations to landscape requirements, where the commission can require additional landscaping or more mature plantings when unusual conditions require more extensive screening or for noise abatement to prevent the depreciation of adjoining residential properties. And then they have a B for reduced landscaping, where they may reduce the landscape requirements for excellence in building or site design after considering the size and quality of landscape materials, the compatibility of proposed structures with surrounding architectural types, quality of building materials, the site characteristics, and other features and characteristics. I just found that very interesting because that seems to give their commission a lot of latitude to deviate. And when Fred is talking, and this is something I struggle with because I don't understand the legal side of it necessarily, Chuck, is, it's a regulation, are they guidelines and recommendations, or are they, things like in the parking that's a little bit more strict, things to be strictly adhered to as far as, if you have so many spaces and certain amount of cover. And so, obviously we've gone back and forth and been debating the balance of that. But, I think that's where I think the commission should focus some of their consensus, because I think that's where the confusion is arising from. Do we put a number to encouraging native plantings, or do we just encourage it? I think also in the Guilford regulations, they say native and invasive plants, that plant species native are encouraged and non-natives are discouraged, and invasives are prohibitive. They've making it very simple. Now, I don't know if part of the commission would like to take that approach or would like to be very specific. I've always tried to sort of fall in the middle because when I'm working on a planting plan, I'm trying to use natives where it's appropriate. And just the other day, somebody was we were talking about a certain location in town where the restaurant has changed hands multiple times, and the landscaping in front on the streetscape is very English garden, lots of native, lots of variety, lots of perennials. And, when that's maintained, it's beautiful. But with all the turnover of retail, that's become a bit of a little bit of a jungle when it gets between things, and new tenants don't always know how to maintain it. And so that's where I always come back with, defaulting to less is more sometimes in some situations, and just like protecting the natural environment that's taken years to create itself is better than disturbing it, which obviously leads me into Joe's comments about limited disturbance. Like this is all a new concept for me from the way I've grown up in the industry as well. And you know I see the merit of what Mikhail's you know trying to specify, and in that let's obviously we need to like create a logistics plan. And I don't know if if it's the consensus of the committee that we do more than just put a band around the property versus really defining certain distances from things. And I think that's really where the discussion needs to come from, because we haven't had direction, so we've picked something that we thought was trying to create a fair balance for developers and protection. And we have to test it to some degree. That's sort of the what we're going to be dealing with, and it may require a lot more work on the part of the staff. And you know I don't know where we want to go from that. So those are just a few things. I'm kind of thinking out loud a little bit. So
Thanks, Marcy. I know I want to hear, well, go ahead. I have some thoughts and comments too, but Sharon, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would like to answer Fred's concern about why we are changing these regulations. And I think with the old regulations, we were losing an enormous amount of trees in Branford. And I don't think that we were having what's known as smart development. And I think Mikhail has said over and over again that in all of his focus groups, people have been saying that we want Branford to stay looking like Branford. And so if we didn't do something to change the old regulations, I think we would continue to lose a tremendous amount of trees, which are just crucial to our environment and our well-being and our health. I mean, I could list all the advantages of trees. We've gone over this over and over again. And I mean, it's clear in all the data and all the scientific testimony that we've had about how important trees are to our health, to our wildlife, to all of that. So I think that that is why we need to change the regulations. I have to defer to Joe Chadwick and Mikhail. I also don't quite understand the limits of disturbance and how that's going to be implemented. One of the ways I think that may help enforcement, and I don't know, is if we definitely have a landscape architect look at the plans and be involved from the very beginning. I would think that that would help enforcement and with design and with using however the land can best be used with whatever natural fauna that we have. So that's where my head is at right now.
Thanks, Sharon. Dave, thoughts, comments?
I I've read some of the documents that's come out in the past, and I'm like with Fred. There's some things I just don't understand. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And again, I've never seen any problems. Trees can be replaced; they can be replanted. Um, I just, again, I guess I'm on the fence, pretty much where to go. That's pretty much all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, here are my general thoughts. First, one of my goals is to get a regulation. We've been working on this for a couple of years. I think there are problems with the existing regulation. We used the excellence in landscaping design many times to approve an application when there was no excellence in the landscaping design. It was just that was the only way around the requirements of the regs, because they had specific, you got to do this in the side yard, you got to do this in the front yard, you got to do this in the rear yard. That's the way the current ones read, and they didn't, and numerous applications. And so we had to make a finding of excellence in landscaping design, which was a sham, frankly. I think it was just incorrect, but we have to say that the project complies to the regs, so that was there. So that's always bugged me that we did that. Second, there is some question. I don't understand the legal stuff. And Marcy, you raised it. Why we can't be more flexible and waive things and whatever. The legal case that came out a few years ago was a case for building a McDonald's in the town of Monroe. It's called Mackenzie. What the Monroe zoning regulations said at that time, they had some drastic ones. They said, "Oh, we can waive setbacks and things like that," but they also said we can waive all the landscaping requirements. And what the court said, no, you can't. That's what a zoning board of appeals does. That's why you have variances. If you can't comply with the regulation, you got to go to that other board and show a hardship, and then you do it. That's the way the system is. You can't write into your regs the right to waive stuff. So that kind of that has always sort of been in the background when we come up with stuff. So that has been also going on. Why don't we just do that? Because we have that. And it's unfortunate because landscaping is one of the most fudgiest things in the world. It's not like a setback. It could be 5 feet, 6 feet. There is a whole subjective element in that. So it makes it more difficult. So that's sort of the landscape we're dealing with. I think there are problems with the existing regs. And then we went through a lot of discussion, and there was public comment. There was public, mainly, the last time we went around, remember Perry had a PowerPoint that showed all the problems with it because we required, tree replacement, whatever. So that was a tough issue. I'm always seeing this as we've got the ecological side and we got the developer side, okay? And we're trying to get something that we can both live with and come up with something that's an improvement over what we have. So that was kind of why I suggested, Marcy, because you're kind of like on the development side, I suggested you, Peter. Peter was just, I think, had looked at a lot of stuff, and McKeel. Why don't you three come? Let's go to my suggestion. And also get Perry involved. What we haven't heard this time around, I haven't heard Perry or anyone else from the development community saying this is terrible. And we have heard a lot from the ecological side. All the letters from Conservation Commission support. So I think there is a public, let's do something to, and if I had to, characterize it, would be gratuitous tree removals, or something like that. That was an issue that people were concerned about. And so I thought, okay, this kind of looks interesting, and the whole limit of disturbance is novel. I just haven't seen it before, but it is kind of neat. And that's not to say someone can. There's no rule against removing any trees. So I can go and cut a tree tomorrow, and But the idea is, well, if we get it regulated at the beginning, that would prevent that. That's what I saw that as. But yeah, it is new, and maybe it can be tweaked or whatever. So there were other things about that, and then I had some comments about the applicability because I think, that that's the other thing, right? Right now, the existing regulations, it apply to any special permit. So whatever, if there's an oversized garage, which you need a special permit on, then technically you got to put in your front and your rear and whatever, and we just don't do it. And that's got to be corrected. And that's part of the applicability section that I think that we want to work on. So, but I think I can do that. I got some language you can tweak in to do that. That's what I want to do. So that's where I'm coming from. I think this, in my mind, it looked more flexible than what we have now. The whole side and rear stuff, which, it's focused from visibility from the street, which I think is probably the way you should do it. It's not the whole mandatory side and rear, which we just disregarded because we found it excellent when it wasn't. I think it's good. Take it out of there. And you have a lot of good guidelines in there. And I get there's always the tension between specific and requiring certain things, and it shall be X, Y, and Z in the flexibility. And one of the themes I've gotten from you, Marcy, is that you want to encourage more flexibility. You want the landscape professional to be able to do things, and you want to have a regulatory framework that allows them to do that versus the setback analogy. There must be a 10-foot, whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought this was better than what we had. So that I kind of liked that element of that. So anyway, that's where I'm
Can I
coming from.
interrupt?
Sure, absolutely.
I think my point was I really hadn't read the Guilford regs, since working so hard on this. And I just re-skimmed these and it was, very
Right.
specific and enforceable and,
Yeah,
which I think is
yeah.
a good thing, and I mean, I was pleasantly surprised. And a lot of the things we had in there to begin with, but I do agree it's that excellence piece. And I guess my question with the Guilford is, is there legally any latitude to sway from something we can't anticipate? This is a good specific framework to start with, but if we see something that we don't expect, how do we address that?
My opinion is that Guilford is vulnerable to a McKenzie challenge if it were to be contested. That rarely
Clearly.
happens. What
Yeah.
I think is, we can modify it I just think it could be. And the idea is we want to avoid that because they're gonna say no, if you don't like it, get a variance. That's your remedy. If you can't comply with that, that's what you should be doing. So in any
So
event,
that will be the test when we see more variances coming out of this.
yeah, but I don't want variance. I don't like variances. I mean, I want to.
either. I want you
I
to
want to
decide.
get it.
Yeah.
I like it because there's no hardships, guys. There rarely is a hardship. It's a joke. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from. On this. So I bet the specific points, maybe the limits. I get the novelty, Joe's point, and maybe there's another way of doing that. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. And I had some tweaks on the applicability and some of the other things like that. But my goal is I do want to, and I haven't seen a lot of opposition from the developers because I know Perry's here tonight. He's kind of looking at this, and I think he's been going over that. And I'm sort of between Marcy and Perry, that's who I've sort of thought is they're going to be jumping on us if there's something they don't like. Because that's what
Well,
I'm
they
trying.
probably won't, but yeah.
No, maybe, but something given I think you represent,
Yeah,
site
well, I
developers,
respect
you got to do something. So yeah, so that's kind of where I was coming from, and so anyway, that's where that is. But I do want to hear from the public, and I see Peter's got his hand raised, and there may be others, but does anyone have any further comments before we open it up to the public? Okay, let's hear some public comment then. It looks like let's start with Peter, and then we'll go to Perry.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Andrus. This is Peter Henschel speaking. Just a couple of points. I mean, I think there were some very clear goals in creating these new regs that are improvements and were lacking in the older regs. And One obviously was the inclusion of the requirements for native species, which we haven't talked about, but that was clearly worked into this and was one of the starting points early on in changing the regs. Another was in trying to limit unnecessary development as much as possible, and I think that McHale's use of the LOD structure really helps to define that. The third was parking, and my feeling has always been that Branford's requirements for landscaping within parking areas has been insufficient compared to what other towns are doing, and in terms of the ultimate response in development plans. So those three things seem to be pretty clear goals of things we were trying to achieve, and that you could say were broken in the older regs, and are part of the reason for doing this. The comments about not really getting any feedback from the development community, I mean, if there has been a lot of publication or publicity around this, I think for quite a while now, but if there was still any real concern that the development community had not fully chimed in, there's no reason why the commission can't hold this open for another meeting and do an overt outreach to that community to try to get them, number one, aware that this is being discussed, look at the proposal, and come, if they have comments, come and make those comments. So, that's always an option for the commission. Relative to the discussion of that sort of hard break in the LOD requirement between the 5,000 square feet, under and over, and the fact that you have that big jump in the allowable setback off of the building structure, I think there are ways to fix that. The intent, obviously, was that in smaller buildings, you based on the purpose that the building is being developed for, you very well could limit yourself to a smaller setback off the building versus a larger building. A way of fixing it might be to use a lower and upper threshold, where you said that the start threshold was the 5,000 square feet and the 25-foot setback, and then maybe say the larger threshold was something like 10,000 square feet, and at that point you reach the 45 feet, and then just say that anything basically in between was a ratio of those two based on the square footage. So you can make it so that you don't have a hard and potentially unfair adjustment there. But I think having a limited disturbance off the building footprint itself does make sense. And if you have projects that require huge amounts of parking versus projects that don't require much parking at all, that's going to be accommodated in the setback off the parking area. So, I don't see any particular problem in that particular aspect of it. The fact that McHale's added in construction logistics and the other improvements as one of the additional setback limits, I think that pretty much would resolve any issues of doing utilities, construction, et cetera, where because of the nature of what was being achieved, you needed to have a greater setback off of that logistic area. So that, in my mind, pretty well accommodates that. Relative to the screening comment that was made, I think an easy and appropriate fix would be to change the shall to a may. And I say that because you've added back in residential into this category, which I'd have to go back and look at, because there may be, in my mind, there may be some flags or some issues to develop there. But if you have a residential project in a residential area, you may not want, in fact, screening of that type between structures. It may be something that, again, should be a may, and has to do with whether the adjacent property owner desires it, doesn't desire it, et cetera. So that would be one thing that you could look at. And again, lastly, I think that McHale's addition in terms of alternatives in the end to allow by special exception modifications of these requirements for special purpose I think it gives it quite a bit of flexibility in terms of if you really did have a very unusual project with a very unusual landscape plan, they could run that route to get it approved as an alternative to these specific requirements. So just a couple of comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Perry, you have some comments?
Yeah, so Perry Maresca, Branford Economic and Business Development for the town of Branford. So to address some of the comments that were made earlier, I did reach out to a lot of builders, developers. They were concerned that their comments or concerns could be held against them, and I assured them that that wouldn't be the case. But it's still something that does come to mind for them. They were just afraid to get involved. I don't know if we can do some form of we send this out to all of them, say this is what we're doing, and then somehow they get it back to us in some anonymous form, but we know that it came from a legitimate person or group that we sent it to. They just see it as another regulation overreach, which is normal. Anytime there's something like that, someone's going to think that. So they just think twice now before getting involved in a project in Branford. Having said all that, these regulations are almost a 180 from what was attempted back a couple of years ago. So there's definitely some, I'll say, appreciation with those that I've spoken to. So I don't think that by any stretch of the imagination that what we're trying to put forth here is a horrible thing. I just want to make sure that we look at all the different angles and make sure we address everything to not have anybody run away. One developer said something to the effect of, "Yeah, we'll make sure the last developer shuts the lights off when we all leave." So again, they're coming from a certain perspective that we may or may not understand. But I do think one of the ways to address it is what you guys have talked about is, you have a professional landscaper to do the design work. That could be part of what is required and can alleviate a lot of frustration for the developer because someone that develop or landscapers that do work with the town on a regular basis know the regulations, similar to a lot of the civil engineers. They know what the regulations are, and they take away a lot of the concerns and nervousness or frustration that a developer may have. Very similar to what we do with lighting. There's the lighting regulations that we have. They've got to submit the photometrics before anything is even considered on the planning and zoning. So, something to that effect from professional landscaper could very well be, something that could work. Some of the things that I think are concerned is like, okay, the implementation of the implementation of the first phase, that's easy. Then we've got the monitoring and the enforcing, and then what about abuse down the road? So how do we address that? Because I see it in other aspects. People that play by the rules are the ones that end up getting more frustrated and whatever. And then one thing I do have a question on, because there's something similar that we've had. Let's say there's a parcel that straddles a town line of whether it be North Branford or Guilford or East Haven. And let's say it's 3 acres and 1 acre is in North Branford. 2 acres are in Branford. They don't touch North Branford at all. And there's a full forest of trees of that acre. And in Branford, we end up going through like 1.5 acres where they need to. That's where the building's going to be because of topography, whatever. So they have all these trees that will address the people that are concerned about the tree getting cut down. But unfortunately for Branford, most of the trees that get affected are in Branford, but yet the entire area still has what we need or require or desire for the trees. So how do we address something like that? Is it just, hey, you know what? you can't cut them down in Branford. You're gonna have to do something else, and then the whole project falls through. So those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about. And again, I am not saying we should not do this. This is a huge improvement from what was going on before. And I will credit the Marcys and the Peters for working on it and reaching out to me. Thank you, Chuck, for making sure that there was some other input. But the only thing I can say is if we can somehow get the realtors and the developers to not fear and just say, look, this is very important. It's only going to be beneficial to them. And I've tried to do that verbally. I've tried to do that in emails. But I think it needs somebody bigger than me to convince them. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Shirley.
Hi. First of all, this started in the Forest Commission and the Conservation Commission, Parks and Open Space. We're all for it because we're well aware of there's a major biodiversity crisis, and the science says that we don't have enough national parks. There's so much development that, birds and bumblebees are just not going to make it. And there is science to suggest if we plant natives in the property we own, we can bring back bumblebees. They're down 90% in this state. 3 billion birds have been lost in the last 50 years. So there's a lot of science behind this. I called developers and spoke to a couple, one of which is here in Branford, and he totally got it because he knows about the biodiversity crisis and thought it was a good reg. The other developer I talked to who develops here and closer to New York said that, and he does really good stuff in Branford, he said that he's trying to demonstrate to Branford you can do it right because the way it's set up now, developers like this town because they can do it really cheaply. And that's not good. I think we should be developing the town well. One town planner I spoke to said the most common request he gets from his citizens is don't let us look like Branford. I did call town planners to get a sense of what they were doing about the problem with nature and that type of thing. And Guilford, for example, said, that's wonderful. Please send me a copy when it's done. Other town planners, like Greenwich, they have 75% natives. Richfield, Summerfield, they're all moving in the direction because that's what the medical and scientific people are saying necessary for lower forms of life, like our pollinators, which if they go extinct, we will go because they're the basis of the food chain. And like Sharon was saying with regard to trees, we need trees more than ever. If you live on a street that has a lot of trees, you live longer. If the trees come down, your premature mortality goes way up because of air pollution. Air pollution is a silent killer. Our U.S. healthcare system spends $820 billion a year on treating diseases just due to air pollution. When you see that wildfire smoke, that's PM 2.5s. They're extraordinarily toxic. Your only protection are trees. The trees absorb them. Similarly with other pollutants. Trees are our protection. Now with climate change, we need more trees for shading. So they can't be cut down willy-nilly. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you? I think it's come a long way. I think it looks good now. Branford will be a role model. Guilford was not the only town planner that said, please send me a copy. So I think this commission shouldn't be about making development easy. It should be about making it good for the health and well-being of us humans and other forms of life that live in Branford. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Shirley. I see our zoning enforcement officer, Heather. You have your hand raised. Heather, you have some comments?
Yeah. All right. Hi. Sorry. Um, Heather Gwinnell, zoning enforcement officer. So zoning enforcement hat on. I said it last time. Um, i- if there are rules and there are regulations and there are guidelines and they are clear, even if they are very black and white and people are uncomfortable with the um, rigidity of them, I have two comments. One is that's what the ZBA is for. If they're rigid and they, for example, if you're at a property line, like Perry said, and there's something, well, we're not just going to build in Branford, that's probably not true. They can go to ZBA. That's what it's for. And I can only enforce things that are, I can't very well enforce may. I can pretty much only enforce shall. So, yes, you can have some flexibility insofar as you may choose among this list, but it still should be in that list. So the natives is key because then it really is focusing the whoever's designing the planting on what they actually have to do. And sort of crossing the line a little bit, I am most recently, before this job, was in the private sector as a developer. And so a couple of comments there is, sure, they are, it's not uncommon. People get frustrated and they don't want to spend more money. But many, 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 many developers do not live in the towns that they build in. And so we want to live and create a town that we want to live in, not necessarily just that developers want to build in. And my guess is if there's a tract of land that's available in towns that we are attempting to emulate in one way or the other, then developers will come. They will always come because we're a vibrant town with a lot of people in a nice little socioeconomic niche. So I don't think that that's going to be an issue. We just need to make sure that everybody understands what the plan is and that it's not shifting goalposts as they're going through the process. And then let's see, any other note that I had? Yeah, that's more or less it. So, and I think the science thing, if we go into that, I'm not going to jump down the rabbit hole of the science thing, but yeah, there's many things that we need to do to improve our overall well-being where we live for our own morbidity and mortality, and especially considering how many people are not just moving into the older time of life who live here, are more retired, and you know, that's our population is aging and we want them to age healthy, not just being alive. So good.
Thank you, Heather. I see that our Harry Smith, our former town planner, has his hand raised. Harry, have some comments?
Sure, thank you. Someone trying to retired. We're worried about quality of life too. I just wanted to throw a couple more comments in. I don't know whether.
Harry, it's really hard to hear you.
Let me get a little closer to the microphone. How's that?
Better, thank you.
So I did submit a couple more written comments and some excerpts from Guilford and Guilford zoning regulations. You know, no regulation is perfect. I mean, our regulations before this date back from I got to town. They were pretty fresh off the press then. As time went, parent, you know, this set of revisions for these.
Harry, we're losing you again. Could you get closer?
I don't know. How's that?
Now it's okay.
No regulation is perfect, and I think Nikhil has done a good job of adding some flexibility into what was some rigid standards that created, as Chuck mentioned, some problems and some requirements to approve modifications under some previous wording. You know, that said, they also, I think, create, more of a need to have a landscape architect still involved as a default requirement in the current regulations, and just using the terminology landscape professionals that kind of rated in my comment, be open to some interpretation, particularly since I understand by statute, architects and professional engineers practice landscape architecture as long as they don't call themselves landscape architects, and do probably fit a number of other kinds of people into what is a landscape professional argument. So at least, and I think Guilford and Milford both have default requirements for plan preparation by landscape architects, and then provisions to back off of that. If that kind of thing is not run afoul, that's an arbitrary way without a criteria. So I think that's something really to look at changing, go forward and adopt these things. I think they definitely are improvements. So I support them in general. One possible change to the LOD requirement could be, this is anticipated as a way to protect undisturbed property and keep it functioning more appropriately in its natural condition without any alteration. Absent having some kind of conservation easement or restriction, making that continue on into the future could be a little tricky. So at least that a requirement requiring someone to come back to the commission for any changes to a defined LOD and a site plan. Something. I also think we're trying to keep as many shalls in there, piggybacking on comments from Heather. And with some provisions to try and back off of those. I think the modification section is already in there that you'll just put in is a way to do that and not run foul of problems. I keep that closely to make sure that's not going to happen. That kind of thing, in addition to the flexibility and the standards right now, I think, could give you comfort with putting in a requirement, for example, having property line offering a screening for special exception use in the residential zone, because something in landscape regulations have been, somewhat successful doing is tailoring development into areas where some of the impacts of that development will be problematic respect to the abutting properties, land uses, particularly residences. So, sometimes the line of giant arborvitaes is not the best solution, but sometimes it's that kind of thing may be the only thing you can do. But you have a lot more flexibility in the regulation that would give a professional a lot more possible choices to try to address that kind of thing. So I think those are pretty much the gist of what I had in terms of comments. I'm not going to go through the other comments I had that weren't addressed, that up to you to parse through. But again, it's hard for me not to say anything since I was involved in this for quite a while myself. And I do applaud McKeel for taking it much further and hopefully close to the finish line in terms of something that's an improvement. It may not be the final end result or the perfect solution, but I think it's definitely. Thank you.
Second, sure. Thank you, Harry. Are there other members of the public that wish to comment? McKeel or Dan, you see anyone?
No more hands raised, no comments in the chat.
Okay. McKeel, I want to give you a chance to talk. We sort of went through, talked early on, but then we've heard a lot of other comments. Any thoughts, comments for us?
Thank you. No, I think a lot of good feedback, and I think these have only helped improve it as we've gone through. I'm wondering if we're sort of at the point where we're tinkering as opposed to creating. And I would just sort of, let the commission know. I did take it. I heard from people that there was this attempt at redoing the landscaping regulations. Some people asked me to take a look at it. I did, And all I did really was build off of a lot of the work that everyone did, and sort of focus in on what the themes were. And from that vantage point, all I'm doing is really trying to build on what was done. And I think those are reflecting what community values are trying to be done in Branford. So everyone sort of mentioned, there will be no perfect regulation. Well, I don't, there is no. The reason why we have regulations is because no community is perfect, and we're trying to provide the protections and the encouragement and the discouragement that's appropriate. And then we have a commission of volunteers who are there to weigh the pros and cons of a proposal. I think it's a pretty good system. I don't think you're going to get a regulation that solves what is essentially a group of committed volunteers to try and weigh the pros and cons of any proposal. So I think that's where I'll leave it. I am sort of the opinion where I don't know what further tinkering is really can be worked on other than sort of the LOD and what are we going to do in the residential districts. But I feel like a lot of good work has been put into this by a lot of people. I'll hand it back to you, Chair.
Thanks, McKeel. Okay, so I think the issue that we have now is, do we continue the public hearing? Do we close the public hearing? We don't have to vote on it, but we can close the public hearing. We can still make changes to it as long as we don't, add a new section of the regulations, which we're not going to do. So the grounds for continuing the public hearing, if you wanted to do that, was the perception that there may be part of the community that has not weighed in on this, the realtors, the developers. You heard, I think, Fred, you had mentioned that, and then Perry had commented. So on the other hand, Perry also indicated that he reached out and spoke to them directly, and that this is not the same one as the earlier drafts. So I think that's the question. So I think question number one is, do we continue the public hearing? If not, we close the public hearing. I don't think we're in a position to vote. We're not. And frankly, I would like, some of the tweaks that we had talked about, because I had some suggestions on the applicability thing in the residential. It sounds like Joe had some possible thoughts on the limits of disturbance of addressing that in perhaps a different way. And I don't know if anyone else had some. So we could do that, and we could just, if we get to that stage, I could, you can send them to McKeel with comments, and we could talk about them, or we could talk about them tonight. But so what do you think about whether we should continue the public hearing or not? Let's just go around and see what we think about that. Joe Chadwick, any thoughts?
I would say we should leave it open only from the standpoint that Perry is going to be soliciting other comments, and if the public hearing is closed, they may feel as though we are being dismissive of what they have to say. So to the extent that we want them to take their comments seriously, and we want that opportunity to be there. And we don't want to give the impression that we're just have a potential of disregarding anything. So I'm voting to keep it open.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Fred, thoughts?
I agree with Joe. I think that the easiest thing to do is to close the meeting, but I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do is keep it open. Let's just make sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's. Give anybody out there one more opportunity to speak their piece. If they don't, they don't. Because then I agree with McKell. You know what? After a while, we're going to go around in circles. We pretty much know where these regs are going to end up, and I didn't hear any outrageous negative comments that these are so terrible we shouldn't do it. So I think it's okay for one more session to keep it open. Let's do that, and then at that stage of the game, we can put it to bed.
Thanks, Fred. Joe Bayuso?
Yeah, I was going to be in favor of closing it, but now listening to what Joe and Fred said, yeah, we probably best to keep it open one more meeting. But definitely, I think enough is enough, and McKeel is correct. Now we're starting to tweak instead of just, it's not going to be 100%, but we have to start somewhere. And I think keeping it open for one till next meeting, and then I think we should, based on right now what we know now, I think we should just close it and tweak it a little bit more if we feel we have to after the closing of the public hearing, and let's vote and put this to bed.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Marcy?
I'm rereading it and so forth, and I don't think that we're going to be substantially needing to deviate. We've laid out a good balance between natives, disturbance, what our intent is, gave flexibility, gave opportunity to modify if necessary. Personally, I do appreciate Harry's comment about landscape professionals being defined. Um, I would like to see things by landscape architects or at least certified, garden designers, or many times I'm not seeing it in the past, even though the state statute allows engineers design. That's just not what they've been trained in. So see that tweaked, but in terms of closing the hearing, which I'm supposed to be discussing, I think by next session we're going to have what we need to vote on it, and we don't necessarily, we can close it and then vote. I don't, and I see no issue running it open up until the vote, just in case there's another opinion.
But
The only reason for me to close it would be so that we could get to a vote. If we need to have a meeting between closing and have a vote, that's really my stance.
Okay, so you're
Like,
okay.
close it if it means we can vote next time. If we can vote next time and leave
You
it
can
open,
close-
then that's
Right.
fine too.
Yeah, no, we often have the public hearing vote on the same evening, so it's no problem with continuing it from that point of view. I don't know if we'll be ready to do it, but that's what we could do. Sharon?
I I understand what Perry was saying about wanting to give the developers an opportunity to speak, but I think we already have. And I think we've had a number of public hearings, and they've had an opportunity to hear their say, to have their say. And I really don't quite understand what he means by they'll be penalized by expressing their feelings. So I'm not quite sure what that is all about. I also definitely would like to see provisions for landscape architect in the regulations, and that's there. And I don't think that there's very much more that will be added that would make a change. So I would hope that we could close it and vote on it.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Dave?
I would keep it open. Like I believe it was Fred saying, one more session. Maybe maybe people are going to hear this, see this, and they want to come forward. One more time. And then I forgot somebody had said. Then we have a vote, and then just put it to bed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. It sounds like a majority is in favor of keeping it open for one more hearing, and I think on the grounds that, we could still keep it open, close it, and vote if we wanted to, because we do that for many applications. But that would address the concern that if there is concern that they haven't known about it, and then frankly, I would encourage Perry to get the word out that if there are developers that are concerned and have comments, we'll keep it open for them. So we cover ourselves from that end. In the meantime, what I would suggest is we keep it open. It sounds like the majority would favor that, and so we keep it open for Makia, what's our agenda look like for the next meeting? Do we have? I know there's a bunch of there's site plans, but there's not We don't have
Yeah,
big agendas, though.
No, there's one. It's unlikely that the big project that's over in wetlands will come over on the next agenda, and they're just small residential projects.
Okay. And even if it comes over, we gotta have to have a public hearing. It wouldn't be for a while. So it
Right.
looks like it's not like it's from a logistical scheduling point of view, keeping it open one more is gonna mess us up. But I would suggest, and I'm gonna do this, is even some of the additions that McKeel had, again, I'm focusing on the applicability. I had some comments on that and maybe some suggested language that if anyone, and particularly Joe, I think if you had some thoughts, tweaking the limits of disturbance, some other ways might want to do that, maybe send it to McKeel. We could gather that. That may help move the process along because either we'll end up talking about it anyway. So let's talk about that. So if anyone else has any particular comments about either any of the changes or anything else, look at them again. Maybe you can send it to McKeel. You can gather that, and then we keep it open. And then we could, if anyone asks, are we shutting people out? The answer is no. We were making special efforts to make sure if they have, and I would hope they would. If we do keep it open, and if somebody has been shy, I hope they're not shy and they come in and give the comments, because certainly that no one's going to be penalized for having, when we're looking at a text change, you want to hear from the community that is being regulated, and if they have some good things that we're missing, that we're blind, I certainly want to hear that. So with that, I think what we'll do is we'll continue that to our next meeting, which is when, McKeel?
March 19th.
Okay, so we'll continue this to our March 19th meeting and see where we are then. So thank members of the public who spoke on this, and be able to speak again if you want. So thank you, everyone. So with that, let's move on. Our agenda, item number 2 on our agenda, again, I think we indicated that was Vincent Grillo, 23 West End Avenue. That has been withdrawn.
Correct.
And then that going then to old business, we have no old business. That's right. And then new business, it looks like we got to set a public hearing for an oversized accessory structure for which our current landscaping regulations they have to comply with. It's a special exception, and so make sure. I hope, Dan, you look very closely to make sure that all those rear and side yard stuff is complied with. So
I thought the design was excellent. So
okay, so we'll schedule a public hearing for that one. I don't know when it'll be, but it'll come up. So so that brings us now to our minutes of the last meeting. I think they were circulated. Is someone? I was absent. Fred, I think you did a great job from what I heard, running that meeting. So
never as good as you, Chuck. Seriously.
Thank you. So does someone want to make a motion with respect to the February 19th minutes?
I'll make the motion. Fred Russo makes that motion.
Fred makes a motion to approve the February 19th minutes. Is there a second?
Chadwick seconds.
Second by Joe Chadwick. I'm going to abstain, or because I wasn't there. So either if Sharon and Dave were you, Sharon? Were you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it Sharon's turn to vote? I don't know.
I don't think so, actually, but
okay.
I was
Dave,
there.
Dave, were you there?
No, I wasn't there.
Oh, you weren't there, so you're up, Sharon.
No.
Okay.
So I give it to Sharon.
Okay. Okay, then. So there's been a motion and a second to approve the minutes for the February 19th. All those in favor, Joe Chadwick.
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo.
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuso.
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy.
Marcy's in favor.
And Sharon.
Sharon's in favor.
Okay. So those minutes are approved. Any correspondence, McKeel?
No correspondence, but staff does request we add bond releases to the agenda.
Okay. Is there a motion then to add, how many are there?
There's 2, I believe. And Heather can.
There's 3.
Okay, 3 bond releases to the agenda.
I had emailed, but yeah.
Right. Okay, so motion to add the 3 bond releases to the agenda. Someone want to make that motion?
Chadwick makes that motion.
Motion by Joe Chadwick. Is there a second?
Fred Russo
Joe
seconded it.
Second by
Joe.
Fred. Further discussion. All those in favor, Joe Chadwick,
Joe Chadwick in favor.
Fred Russo,
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuzo,
In favor.
Marcy,
Marcy's in favor.
and Chair is also in favor. Okay, let's hear bond release number 1. Heather, you want to describe that for us?
Sure. These two of them are for Mariners Landing, Maple Street. One of them is for soil and erosion controls, which was for 19,000. I wrote that wrong. It's $19,850. I wrote $1.9,285,000 on my memo. I will correct that. And
Okay. Why don't we
Wow.
take them just sequentially? We'll take them one at
Yep.
a time because we'll probably need votes on each of them individually.
okay. And then
So
the second bond release is also for Mariners Landing, which was also for $19,000. Which one is this? Sorry.
Okay.
And
What was that?
they're not, of course, popping up easily right now. I wrote them in $19,000 for the concrete sidewalk and Riverstone that has been installed. And then the last one, and that one is for $19,548 specifically. And then the last one is for the 47 Gould Lane subdivision, the last of the surety bond that they have on that project, which was to be held for 12 months after the release from the Public Works, the road, the markings, in case there was any issues. That was 18 months ago, and there's been no issues. So
Okay.
they asked for
So
release.
good. So the Public Works has signed off on that and engineer for that. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Okie doke. So we'll take these, the first one, and you're recommending that we release all of these. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So the first one is there a motion to release the Mariners Landing soil erosion bond for, I believe it was $19,850 on the recommendation of our zoning enforcement officer. Who made that motion?
Chadwick
Motion
makes
by-
that motion.
Motion by Joe Chadwick. Is there a second?
Fred Russo seconds it.
Second by Fred. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe Chadwick,
Chadwick in favor.
Fred,
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuzo,
Joe in favor.
Marcy,
Marcy's in favor.
and Chair is also in favor. Okay, so that is one bond release. The second was also for Mariners Landing for concrete and other matters in the amount of $19,548, which apparently has been installed, and our zoning enforcement office recommended that bond be released as well. Someone make a motion to release that second Mariners Landing bond.
Fred Russo will make that motion.
Motion by Fred to release the bond. Is there a second?
Chadwick seconds.
Second, Joe Chadwick. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe Chadwick,
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo,
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuzo,
Joe in favor.
Marcy,
Marcy's in favor.
and the chair is also in favor. And the third bond release, 47 Gould Lane. This is a subdivision surety bond that we keep to make sure that they do all the work that they're supposed to do for a subdivision, and I guess for the roads and everything else, I guess. And looks like it's been done. Public Works and the CEO and engineer signed off on that. So someone make a motion to release that bond.
Joe Vayuso so moves.
Okay, motion by Joe Vayuzo. Is there a second?
Chadwick seconds.
Second, Joe Chadwick. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe Chadwick,
Chadwick in favor.
Fred Russo,
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuzo,
Vayuso in favor.
Marcy,
Marcy's in favor.
Chair is also in favor. Okay, so those three bonds are released. Is that it for bond releases, right?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Okay, moving on our agenda, is there There was no correspondence, McKeel?
No.
That's correct.
Okay. Other business?
No other business. And so that's it.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone else have any other business? Okay, hearing none then, if someone make a motion to adjourn.
Fred Russo makes that motion.
Motion to adjourn by Fred. Is there a second?
Chadwick seconds.
Second, Joe Chadwick. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe Chadwick.
Chadwick in favor.
Fred Russo.
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuso.
Joe in favor.
Marcy.
Marcy's in favor.
And the chair is also in favor. So, okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.